The main thing is you can make a difference just by getting involved, and you can make the biggest difference. In fact, the change doesn't happen if people don't get involved in research.
Now we're going to be talking about the planning, conception of clinical trials, as also having a discussion about who's leading this clinical research. Prof. Seidu, I was wondering if you could introduce yourself, please.
Thank you, Bernie. My name is Samuel Seidu. I'm a professor of diabetes and cardiometabolic medicine at the University of Leicester. I am a practicing GP. Amongst other things, I am the vice chair of Primary Care Diabetes Europe, responsible for research.
Thank you, Sam. To get right into the juicy question, so when we're talking about trial design and planning, what, in your opinion, are the key solutions that could be implemented to increase Black African and Caribbean heritage participation?
That's an interesting question. It's a very topical issue. Over the past 10 years, we've had a lot of large randomized controlled trials on cardiovascular outcomes, for example, and the representation of the Black population in all those trials is usually around 4 to 5%. The question is, if you do then get the findings which are positive, would you say those findings are applicable to the Black population or not? So that is where the question is coming from. So I think amongst other things, in addition to encouraging participation from the population, one of the big issues that needs to be addressed is ensuring trust in the research community from the Black population. People will naturally get involved in research if they see the principal investigators that look like them. That would normally address the issue of mistrust. For obvious historical reasons, we know about the Tuskegee issue in America. And believe it or not, it's still reigning in people's minds, especially in America. So that actually hampers research participation, and getting principal investigators that look like the patient they are recruiting is one of the antidotes to this problem.
Later on in the event, we're going to have Charles from Caribbean African Health Network, and he's going to be saying his opinion or insights from the participants or potential participants' perspective. But I have heard it discussed that having potential participants feeding into the trial planning might be a way to help participation, because we often hear that the trial is put together in isolation and then they're trying to retrofit it to the population. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that bit, I think NIHR has done a lot of work in this area, and some very good results are coming up. I think the problem is the first part I was talking about, getting the Black researchers there. When it comes to patient participation, yes, in as much as it's difficult to recruit them, it is now a necessity for all researchers to have patient participation groups to be co-producers of the research, protocol. So it is not, unusual to have patients actually listed on the protocol as some of the researchers. So they, at the end of the day, are going to be the recipients of the research output. So it makes sense that they participate in the design and advise the researchers as to how the intervention is going to work or not work on their populations. And they should be part of the team right from the beginning to co-produce the design so that when the outputs are generated, the outputs are not alien to them. So it is important. And I think on that side, very few research funding bodies will give you any research grant if you do not have this part of the story properly addressed before submitting.
That's a great point, Sam, and I'm really delighted that we have Stephen from Diabetes UK after you, who can answer that question or that point with regard to funding. And a final question for this section, Sam. If you had to, I guess it's two parts, if you had to say one recommendation to the research community of all that you said about the priority for better trial planning and conception to increase representation, that's one. And the second one is the same question, but to potential participants. What would you say to the actual participants? So First one, research community. Second of all, participants.
Well, so for the research community, what I will advise is that this is the time. With the leveling up agenda, there is a lot of attention on this area. And if you really are interested in generating proper research that is going to make differences, there is a lot of funding in this area. And you just have to come up with innovative ideas on how to encourage participation from the underserved populations. With regards to the participants, it's about showing the data. The data actually shows that people from deprived populations and ethnic minority groups tend to have worse outcomes, however you measure them. And if you are aware of this, the question we should start asking ourselves is why? Is that because the treatments are not appropriate for us? And the only way we can address that question is to participate in the research, encourage colleagues to participate in research, so that when the results are generated, we can say they are applicable to the populations as well.
Thank you so much for your contribution, Sam. Excellent points there. Moving on, we're going to be talking about the funding of clinical research and what can be done to increase diversity in that aspect. Stephen, I was wondering if you could introduce yourself, please.
Hi everyone, so I'm Stephen Parks. I'm the research officer as part of the Diabetes Research Steering Groups at Diabetes UK. I have a background in science research and specifically type 2 diabetes research as well. And I'm also a person living with type 1 diabetes, so I've got quite a good understanding of it from several different areas.
Yes, and I really don't want to tempt fate, but hopefully you'll be changing your title very soon, fingers crossed. Okay, jumping into the first question, we're going to go straight to what solutions do you think could be implemented from the research funders' perspective, Diabetes UK being a massive funder of research in the UK, to increase Black participation in clinical research?
So I think a big part of what we do at Diabetes UK is to involve people living with the condition or affected by diabetes in what we do. So, for example, the group that I work in, the Diabetes Research Steering Group, is set up by Diabetes UK, and it involves people living with diabetes, researchers and healthcare professionals to identify areas of unmet need in diabetes research and to try and stimulate research within those areas. So obviously within those groups, it's important that we have a representative population, so to increase the amount of Black representation that we have within those groups. And that's something that we are trying to do, but it's something that we have found difficult. And I think one of the reasons we've found it difficult sometimes is we need to maybe change our approach and recognize that we need to understand how to reach out to communities that we have typically had a very we've not been very good at engaging. So I think it's a responsibility of funders to identify new ways to reach out to those communities, and that's something that we're trying to do.
Absolutely. And what role do you think funders or funding would have in improving that, in that representation?
So, I mean, I think there's several different routes that funders could take to improve Black representation in trials. Sam mentioned quite a few of them as well in his talk. So ensuring that in any application for funding, there are questions asking researchers, how are you considering different populations in your research? Is your research, does it include people from different backgrounds, and is it representative of the population of people with diabetes? We know that diabetes is a condition which affects different communities differently, and also is a condition which seems to affect people from Black and South Asian backgrounds more so than quite a lot of other conditions. And I think we've seen why that's particularly important. For example, there are some trials which, for example, we had a member of our Diabetes Research Steering Groups mention the soups and shakes diets, and have done quite a lot of work with people from minority backgrounds of Black ethnicity, and quite a lot of them were lactose intolerant, which makes an intervention like soups and shakes very difficult. So rather than to get to the point of funding those projects and then realise that they might not be appropriate for all groups, it's important that you have those discussions to begin with, and that's something we're trying to encourage researchers to do.
I guess same question that I asked to Prof. Seidu. One, speaking to the research community, and then others to potential participants. I guess you're in the unique position that you yourself could be a potential participant. What would you like people to know? What's one takeaway message?
I think the main thing is you can make a difference just by getting involved, and you can make the biggest difference. In fact, the change doesn't happen if people don't get involved in research. So if you care about the lives of your children and other people in your family, it's important that we consider the role that we can play in changing things going forwards. And I'd have to say it's not something that I had considered as a person with diabetes. I hadn't ever been invited to be involved in research, but I think that from this side of things and seeing things from the side of the funders, I now understand the importance of that in a way that I might not have understood before. So just trying to get that point across to as many people as possible, that they themselves individually can make a difference.
I love that. That's incredibly succinct and powerful, actually. But you said that you haven't been approached to take part in research, but I realized that you work in the research committee at Diabetes UK and you also personally do research. So do you think there's a disconnect in our thinking, or why do you think it doesn't come up in people's consciousness to take part in trials? Is there not enough awareness about it? Because you're very aware of research.
Yeah, so for me, I mean, I've had diabetes since I was 3 years old. So it was just never something which I was approached with at sort of going to the hospital and going to see people. And I think that if I had have been asked about it, then I would have considered it. And I have been involved in, even in my teenage years, I've been involved in certain projects, like there's a program called the Staying Positive program, which is run by people with the condition for other young people with lifelong conditions, and I was involved in that. But research wasn't something that I was involved in. And in fact, I mean, the type of research I was involved in was quite basic research. So what I mean by that is sort of lab-based, working with cell lines and not necessarily working with people.
Yes.
I think one of the frustrations I sometimes had with that is that I didn't feel the sort of personal involvement of people with diabetes. And that's what actually led me to take up my role in the diabetes research steering groups, because I do think it's extremely important that people are at the basis of whatever research we do. And that can't always be the case. I understand that. But even in basic research, there are some things that can be done. For example, asking communities, what sort of research would you like to be investigated in the lab? And that should inform what we do. So that's what I try and do now in the diabetes research steering groups at Diabetes UK. And if there is an opportunity to be involved in the trial, I'll put myself out there. If anyone today is running any trials, I'd be more than happy to be involved in them.